Isabella II served as the only queen regnant of Spain in its modern history as a united nation. Yet Isabella's reign was blighted by internal instability, and her inability to rule only made things worse. In time, she became very disliked across her country owing to the corruption, incompetence, decadence and scandals that surrounded her. Join me as we explore her story. The woman who would rule Spain as Queen Isabella II was born at the Royal Palace in Madrid on the 10th of October 1830. She was the elder daughter of King Ferdinand VII, who had ruled Spain on and off again since 1808 in the midst of the Napoleonic Wars, and her mother was Queen Maria Cristina of Spain. Ferdinand had numerous children during his lifetime, but all of these had either died in infancy or were girls. This was problematic as Spain had long adhered to Salic law, an element of the Frankish law code which went back to the 6th century, and which stipulated that females could not succeed to the throne of a nation. Thus, in 1830, Ferdinand had issued a pragmatic sanction to ensure that a daughter of his could succeed him if he died without a male heir. Whoever was to succeed to the throne in Spain would be inheriting a country mired in trouble. As recently as the 16th century, Spain had been the world's most powerful nation, its great empire extending across the Americas, from which it derived enormous wealth in the shape of gold and silver bullion from Mexico, Peru and Bolivia. But Spain's wealth had been its undoing. It failed to innovate and develop a capitalist trading proto-industrial economy, such as had emerged in England, the Dutch Republic and Germany. And then the bullion dried up from the New World, leaving Spain an archaic backwards nation. Moreover, in the early 19th century it had lost a vast majority of its empire, as nations like Mexico, Argentina, Gran Colombia and Peru established their independence. This was the nation Isabella would soon rule. In the end, Isabella would not have to wait long before she came to the throne. Her father died in late September 1833, aged 48, when Isabella was still shy of her 3rd birthday. She now succeeded as Queen Isabella II of Spain, the first queen regnant of Spain since it united into one nation in the early 16th century. One has to go back to the early 1500s and the time of Juana la Loca or Joanna the Mad to find an earlier queen regnant, Juana having been the nominal Queen of Castile from 1504 and Queen of Aragon from 1516 to her death in 1555. Not all were willing to accept this new dispensation though. Ferdinand's brother Don Carlos believed he was the rightful heir and tried to claim the throne himself. This led to a civil war known as the First Carlist War, which would drag on for 7 bloody years. Isabella's mother Maria Cristina led her cause, and they eventually emerged victorious, but in order to do so, she was forced to make extensive concessions to the Spanish army, liberals and other elements within Spanish society in order to win their support. During these years, young Isabella was loved by many, and she was seen in the country as a symbol of liberty, peace and union. Yet behind closed doors, Isabella enjoyed a pampered upbringing. As it would be many years before Isabella could rule Spain in her own right, in the interim, the government was headed by her mother. Maria Cristina used this position to make herself extremely rich, but in 1840, she was forced to renounce the regency. This was because in December 1833, just 3 months after her husband's death, she had secretly remarried a low-ranking soldier. When news of this became public years later, she became deeply unpopular, and as a result from 1840 onwards, Baldomero Espartero, the most successful, most popular Isabellan general, took on the role. One notable accomplishment during the regency of Isabella's mother was the promulgation of a new Spanish constitution in 1837, one which was significantly more liberal than Spain's earlier governing documents, and which sought to reform the country and bring it into the modern era. In 1843, Isabella turned 13, and she was declared to be fit to rule herself, assuming the full powers and responsibilities of the throne. Yet, most accounts state that she was ill-educated, ignorant, and, though cheerful, often lazy. This period was known as the Moderate Decade, as a conservative retrenchment took place in Spanish politics, and although Isabella was now queen regnant, the reality was that Spain was still significantly dominated by politicians and other senior officials. On the 10th of October 1846, Isabella's 16th birthday, she married Francisco de Assis, Duke of Cadiz, a man in his mid-20s and her double first cousin, a not unfamiliar development in Spain where the royal family had been severely inbred for centuries. That same day, Isabella's younger sister Infanta Luisa Fernanda also married. Isabella's new husband was one of Spain's most senior aristocrats, but the marriage was arranged for political reasons, to lend stability to what was a very weak regime at the time. Isabella disliked Francisco's effete mannerisms from their first meeting, and clearly indicated a preference for marrying Francisco's younger brother, Enrique, Duke of Seville. Years later, she allegedly said of her husband, "What shall I tell you about a man whom I saw wearing more lace than I was wearing on our wedding night?" Isabella became pregnant on 12 occasions over the next 20 years. However, from these only 5 children survived into adulthood. In the other instances, Isabella either suffered miscarriages or her children died in childbirth or their infant years, a higher than average rate for child mortality by the mid-19th century, when natal survival rates were improving noticeably. The eldest of their children to survive was a girl named Isabel for her mother, born in 1851. Alfonso was born in 1857, and as we will see, played a significant role in his mother's later life. Then, between 1861 and 1864, 3 more daughters were born, somewhat confusingly all called Maria. These were Maria del Pilar, Maria de la Paz, and Maria Eulalia. There was speculation at the time and ever since that Francisco did not father all of these children, and that he may have been gay and or impotent. The marriage was a huge failure, and Isabella took on many lovers, with rumours of her infidelity quickly spreading throughout Spain and the rest of Europe. Despite this, Francisco recognised every child, though it's believed he would often blackmail the Queen for money in exchange for keeping his mouth shut. Indeed, early on in their marriage in 1847, her dislike of her husband caused a political scandal when she made publicly known her affections for General Francisco Serrano, Duke of La Torre, a man 20 years her senior, and indicated her willingness to divorce her husband to marry him. This proposal never materialised, and Serrano was subtly moved away from Madrid by power brokers within the government, but it was an early indication of the poor state of Isabella and Francisco's marriage, and with this, the negative public image of the Queen began to grow. Isabella might be said to have started to rule properly in the 1850s as she entered her adult years. It was a tumultuous period, one which began with Isabella narrowly escaping an assassination attempt. On the 2nd of February 1852, as Isabella was leaving the chapel of the royal palace, a Catholic priest and liberal activist by the name of Martín Merino y Gómez approached her, giving the impression that he needed to deliver her a message. Once he got close enough, Martín tried to stab her through the chest, but luckily, Isabella's corset saved her, deflecting much of the blow. Although physically she came away with only a minor incision at the right side of the belly, mentally the event left her terrified, while her assailant was quickly seized, questioned and executed. In the summer of 1854, the Progressive Party managed to seize power in Madrid. Led by Francisco Martínez de la Rosa and Leopoldo O'Donnell, these sought to reform the Spanish government in order to root out endemic levels of corruption within it, and to begin modernizing Spain's economy, political culture and intellectual thought. For them, Spain was markedly backwards and behind the rest of Europe. It needed to be overhauled as a society in order to restore Spain's position as a major European power. In declaring this to be their aspiration, they stated that they wanted to preserve the monarchy, but that they believed the court culture which had surrounded the rulers of Spain for centuries needed drastic reform. Thus, Isabella was to be hauled into the process of reform whether she liked it or not, and all signs were that she was opposed to such modernising tendencies. The reform movement was at its most intense between 1854 and 1856. Government bureaucracy was overhauled, the tax collection system was improved, and peculation amongst Spanish officials was cracked down on. Ideas which had surfaced across Europe in the 18th century, such as a reduction in censorship and freedom of political association, ideas which were taken for granted in countries like England by the 1850s, were first permitted in Spain at this time as the reformers sought to create a modern nation state. Land ownership was also looked into to break up the huge land estates held by the aristocratic class and create a more efficient class of smallholders, while there was also an interest in developing a modern railway system across the country. Isabella did not attempt to block these measures, but it was clear that she was no ally of O'Donnell and de la Rosa, and the other progressives within government. Ultimately, the progressive movement burned itself out within a few short years in the 1850s. A new liberal constitution, for instance, was devised in 1856, but it was never put into effect, as reactionary elements within government sought to claim power. These more moderate elements succeeded in securing authority, both because Isabella was more favourable towards them, and also because they oversaw a successful foreign policy, one which engaged in war with Morocco in the late 1850s, and retook the island of Santo Domingo in the Caribbean in the early 1860s, after nearly 2 decades of Dominican independence. The latter project was proposed directly to Isabella by General Pedro Santana in 1860, to which she gave her explicit approval. So, although in many respects she was a ceremonial monarch for much of her reign, this is one area in which Isabella played a direct role in affairs. By the time Santo Domingo was reclaimed for Spain, Isabella was a profoundly unpopular ruler amongst large sections of the Spanish population. They saw her reign as one of scandal, intrigue and decadence, and viewed Isabella as a vain, stupid, overweight, nymphomaniac queen who was incapable of doing her job and was simply an impediment to any reform in the country. In the autumn of 1866, a large gathering of disaffected individuals from within the democratic and progressive movements occurred at the city of Ostend in Belgium. Many of those involved were individuals who had played a role in the progressive movement in the mid-1850s, and were subsequently disappointed by Isabella's conservative instincts and desired to appoint conservative or moderate ministers to run the Spanish government. At Ostend, they agreed a pact to try and topple Isabella and begin a major reform program in Spain. On the 7th of July 1868, Isabella's sister and brother-in-law were linked to a conspiracy against the crown, and she decided to banish them. This was a sign of things to come. What is known as the Glorious Revolution in Spain occurred in September 1868 as a direct consequence of the earlier Pact of Ostend. It began with a naval revolt in the port city of Cadiz and was accompanied by simultaneous revolts in Madrid and other cities and towns. Isabella was not immediately overthrown and managed to rally her supporters in the first days of the revolt. But eventually the generals who were once loyal to her, including her favourite lover, abandoned her, and with the defeat of the royalist army at the Battle of Alcolea on the 28th of September, Isabella's cause was doomed. Accepting this, she headed with her family and entourage over the Pyrenees to Biarritz in southern France, where she intended to live in exile. She left Spain on the 30th of September 1868, the date which is typically seen as marking the end of her 35-year reign. Following her deposition, Isabella and the rest of the royal family made their life in France. During this time, the former queen resided on the Rue de Rivoli in Paris. Back in Spain, the revolution continued, with the brief crowning of Amadeo as King of Spain. He was an Italian prince from the House of Savoy, and the second son of Victor Emmanuel II of Italy, but in the mid-1870s, an arrangement was reached whereby Isabella formally renounced her throne, and her son and heir Alfonso was recognised as King of Spain in December 1874. He returned to the country which he ruled for the next 11 years until his premature death, but Isabella would never return to Spain for any prolonged period of time. Isabella lived into the early 20th century, mostly in Paris during the Belle Époque, though she returned home for a brief period of time following Alfonso's accession. On that occasion, she found that she was effectively prohibited from entering Madrid, and so returned to the French capital. There she was in a relationship with the chief of her staff, Ramiro de la Puente, for many years. It was a quiet and unremarkable extended retirement for a woman who was remembered as a poor ruler of Spain, one who was unable to respond effectively to the multiple calls for reform which were brewing in the 1850s and 1860s. Isabella died on the 9th of April 1904, aged 73, likely from influenza. Her body was transported back to Spain for burial next to her predecessors as kings of Spain at El Escorial Palace. Her funeral took place on the 16th of April at San Francisco el Grande. Queen Isabella II of Spain has come to be known historically in her country as La Reina Castiza and La de los Tristes Destinos, meaning the traditional queen and the queen of sad mischance respectively in English. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Isabella II of Spain. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments. Do you think she was a good ruler? Do you think she was really bad at her job? Or do you think she was just unlucky and was manipulated by the powerful figures within government? I hope you guys are subscribed and the notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. And if you have any suggestions, be sure to leave them down below in the comments. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.